We will begin with the opening prayers.
Lo ye je
Now, can you all hear me? Please raise your hand if you can hear me. First of all, I'd like to wish my greetings to all of the Dharma friends who are listening this morning, especially to the students of the Shedras, who are the main students for this teaching. I hope you are all well. And so today is the sixth day of our teaching. Now, for the last couple of days, we've been speaking in brief about how the mind only spread in China. So, in particular, we've been speaking about how the foundation of the mind only was laid by Maitreya and Asanga and Vasubandhu, and then later how Diganaga and Swabhava, and then the 10 commentators on the 30 verses spread the teachings of the mind only very widely. Now, yesterday, something that I mentioned yesterday orally, but I don't know if it turned out very clearly. So today I'd like to give I'd like to give a diagram or a picture of a diagram listing all of the Chinese mind-only masters. Or excuse me, Indian mind-only masters. So first of all, can you see this? It's not quite listening to what I want it to do. So first of all, So first of all, those who established the foundations for the mind only were Maitreya, Asanga, and Vasubandhu. And among these three, Asanga and Vasubandhu are two of the ones we often call in Tibetan the six ornaments of the world. There are two of these six ornaments, as we say in Tibetan. And so these two are among the two of these six ornaments. And generally, when we talk about the six ornaments of the world, it was probably a term that was well known in India. And we also talk about the two supreme ones in Tibetan. But the term the two supreme ones was not well known in India, as it is said by Taranatha. But in Tibetan, the name, the six ornaments and two supreme ones has become very widespread. In any case, Asanga and Vasubandhu are two of the six ornaments. And then the students who followed India. So in general, in Tibetan, we say that that Dignaga was a student of Vasubandhu, but we don't need to speak about the question of their connection as teacher and student. And so there was Vasubandhu, Dignaga, and Asvabhava, and then Dharmapala. And Dharmapala had a student, Shilabhadra, and Shilabhadra had his student, Xuanzang. And from that, the Dharma characteristic school originated. And so these are what the scholars called the Imagist mind-only school, or the true image mind-only school. So they're known as the Imagist mind-only school. And I'm showing it's not working right. You probably can't see. And so this is Dignaga, Svabhava, Dharmapala, Shilabhadra, Xuanzang, and so forth. These are the Sakara Vijnanavad, or the Imagist mind-only school. And then also from Vasubandhu, he had a student named Gunamati. There's a little mistake there. And so there's a student, the Vasubandhu student was Gunamati. Sometimes these technological things are difficult. So there was a student Gunamati, and then from there, I went to Stiramati and Paramartha. And this is what we call the Compendium of Mahayana School. Now, what some people call this is we often say that Paramartha was the tradition of Stiramati, but some students say that some people say that that Stiramati was after Paramartha. So that's also said. So in any case, Gunamatra and his descendants, or the scholars who followed him, are called the non-imagist mind-only, or what we often call the false image mind-only school. Then there are the 10 commentators on the 30 verses. Now, these 10 commentators, among them, there are two of them were at the contemporaries of Vasubandhu, Bandhushri and Chitrabhana. And so these are the two of the 10 commentators who are contemporaries of Vasubandhu. And then the other of the 10 commentators are three of them Three of the 10 commentators were students of Dharmapala. And so these three commentators were students of Dharmapala were Visheshamitra, Jinaputra, and Gyanachandra. Now, in general, we talk about there is talk about the four great ones. Master Gunaprabha, the Dharmapala, the Nanda, and Rahula. So these are said to be the four great ones in India, as is said in Taranata's History of Buddhism in India. And so in any case, Dharmapala was extremely well known in India and very influential figure. And among the 10 commentators, 3 of them were his students. Now, another of the commentators who is contemporary of Sthiramati was Shuddhachandra. There was another one who's contemporary of Sthiramati, and his name was Nanda. And his student was Jayasena. And Jayasena was also probably a student of Sthiramati. So this is basically how it was. And so the 10 commentators are all listed, given in blue. So the 10 commentators are all in dark blue in this diagram. And so I thought that if I did this and gave you an introduction to him in this way, it'd be easier for you to understand. Now next, I'd like to continue where we left off yesterday. I'm speaking about the spread of the mind only in China. So I will continue speaking about that. No, it's not doing the right thing sometimes. No, yesterday we spoke about the 3 different schools, the 3 great schools that appeared in China. So the first 2, I spoke about the first 2 yesterday. Today we'll talk about the Dharma characteristic school, or we could talk about also the school of the appearances of phenomena. Maybe this is a kind of nicer word. You say a Dharma characteristic school, then it doesn't sound all that good. It doesn't seem to me. I'm the one who did the translation into Tibetan, but I do see a difference in the 2. So yesterday I was calling it the Dharma characteristic school, and so I'm going to keep calling it that today. So to immediately change it to the school of phenomenal appearance, then it may be something that you might misunderstand. So I haven't changed it. When we talk about this Dharma characteristic school, or the school of phenomenal appearance, the great monk of the Tang dynasty, Xuanzang, or who is sometimes called at the time the Tang master of the Tipitaka, brought the mind-only philosophy from India to China. Now, he was extremely well known, even in these days. If you ask a Chinese person, do you know Tang Shuisan? They probably know who he is. If you say Xuanzang, they'd probably know, but if you say Tang Xuanzang, and the reason is It's because there's the tales of there's the tale of the bringing the Dharma from the Great Western Region. And so there's this really famous television series about the one with the monkeys and the king and so forth. And then there's the Tang Master of the Tripitaka. So this is a very well known name for him. So if you say Tang Master of the Tripitaka, pretty much everyone's going to know who you're speaking about. If you say Tang Shun Sang, people might not. So the Tang master of the Tripitaka brought the mind-only philosophy from India to China. And then Xuanzang's student Kui Ji started a new mind-only school, which is called the Dharma Characteristic School. So how is it that Xuanzang brought the mind-only philosophy to China? So at that time, Tang Xuanzang was a person who, from the time he was very young, really wanted to study anything at all. That's the kind of person he was. In particular, he took a great interest in the commentary on the 10 levels as translated by Paramatta. And he also he saw the a treatise on the 17 sections of the Yogacara levels. He had a great interest in that. Even though he didn't have the entire Yogacara levels, they hadn't been translated, he got very interested in them. But, so at that time, there was no complete translation of Yogacara levels in Chinese. And so in order to get that teaching, he went to India. But at that time, the government of the Tang dynasty didn't allow anyone to leave in or anyone to come out, and so there's a very strong prohibition against traveling. But he disregarded whether or not there was a prohibition on traveling, and you could say that he went thousands, say 8,000 kilometers to travel to India. So now, if we look at his great Tang records on the Western regions, we can see that when it talks about how the many difficulties he had on the way to India, all the spirits and so forth, and different difficulties that he had on his way. And so we can read about these. And the actual fact, when he went to India, he went through many difficulties and disregarded any hardships and arrived in India in 624 in the Common Era. Now, when he arrived in India, the greatest university at the time was Nalanda, and he went there. And the abbot at the time was Shilabhadra, the student of Dharmapala. And he studied the mind only with Shilabhadra. In any case, while Xuanzang was staying in China, he studied very widely in the Dharma of all the foundation Mahayana and foundation vehicles, and his primary aim was to study the Yogacara mind-only philosophy. And likewise, he also went to all the different Buddhist sites in India. And he recorded all of the experiences he had in the pilgrimages in his records of the travels to the Western region. And so when people were trying to identify Buddhist sites, his records of his travels were a really important source. If he had not written so clearly and so understandably that there were these sites in his records of his travels, we would be, even to this day, we would be unable to, probably be unable to identify many Buddhist sites. And so he was a very great kindness in doing this. And so he spent 17 years studying in India, studying many different areas of knowledge. And he gathered many different texts and works, literary work, or Buddhist literature, and he brought them with him as he went back to China. And the date when he returned to China was in the 19th year of the Emperor Taizong's reign. And so at that time, in 645 Common Era, he returned to Chang'an, the capital. So at that time, the Emperor Taizong, the Tang Emperor Taizong, was extremely pleased and welcomed him warmly. Not only that, the government went to some expense to establish a center for translation. And the government gave great support to Xuanzang's project of translating these texts. So at that time, the Xuanzang translated many texts from the mind-only school, such as the Sutra Unraveling the 10, the Yogacara Levels, Treatise Clarifying the Teachings, the Compendium of Abhidharma, the Compendium of Mahayana. He also translated many other sutras, the long Prajnaparamita Sutra, the 1 in 100,000, the Treasury of Abhidharma, the Samaya Bed of Yuka Chakra, and other texts. And basically, he took all of the energies of the body-mind, and until he passed away, he devoted his remaining 18 years to translate the sutras and treatises he had brought from India. And he worked without resting. So in brief, so he treated a very large amount, 74 different works of Dharma. And so this is over 1,300 different fascicles or bundles of books of text. So this is a great number of texts. He translated these all into Chinese. Now his translations, so he translated a large number of Buddhist works. And so what his translations were called were the new translations. And the earlier translations were called the old translations. And so that that term of distinguishing the new and the old translation comes, the distinction is the time when Tang Xuanzang returned from that. It's similar to in Tibet, where the difference between the new translations and the ancient translations. And the dividing line between the two of those is when Lotsa Rinchen Sampo lived, and he began to translate it again. And that was, from that point on, it was called the new translation. All the translations before that are called the ancient transmissions. And so it's like, that's what we say in Tibetan. And so it's similar also in China. So in brief, if we look at the content of the works that Xuanzang translated, it contains sutras and treatises from both the Foundation and the Mahayana vehicles. But what his greatest hope was to spread the mind-only view. So that was his main hope. And so for that reason, while he gained a great understanding, comprehension of the pure mind-only view that he had studied while he was in India. And he took that as his basis when he translated the many sutras and treatises about the mind-only. In particular, there is the 10 fascicle treatise on the proof of mind-only that he translated into Chinese. Now, this is an extremely important text because he translated this text, then it created like a new the beginning of a new era in Chinese Buddhist history. Now, this text, as I mentioned the other day, is a compilation of the explanations of all the 30 verses, explanations of 30 verses by the 10 commentators. So first of all, the Tang Xuanzang thought that he had to translate all of the commentaries by the 10 commentators, but he realized if he translated that, it'd be like 100,000 stanzas long. And so it'd be extremely long and be very long. So he thought to himself he wouldn't be able to do that, translate the entire text. When he was worried about that. And so he had a student named Kuiji. Gave the opinion. You don't need to translate all of the commentaries, which Kuiji said. Instead, if you take the meaning of these and you compile them, it would be good, he said. And so he offered that opinion to Xuanzang. And so, just as Kuiji suggested, Xuanzang took the meanings or the contents of the main points of the 10 commentators and compiled them in this text. But primarily, the main explanation is Dharmapala's explanations. And the others are like elaborations on it. And this has become a very important mind-only treatise. And so since this so because this treatise took the teachings of Dharmapala as its basis, this school is later also called the Dharmapala school. And so this master, this vast translator, Xuanzang, also had many peerless students. And so and then the main student was one who I mentioned is the one I mentioned before, Kuiji, who is also called the great teacher of Ci'an, the Ci'an Dashi. So we could call the Ci'an Dashi would mean the great teacher of Ci'an. Maybe if I write this down for you. So he was called the great teacher of Ci'an. And so it's because of its efforts that this new Dharma characteristic school was founded. And it sort of continued the activity of Tang Xuanzang. So generally, instead, if we were to say that the founder of the Dharma characteristic school is Kuiji, not Xuanzang, there are good reasons to say so. Now, Kuiji, to hear a really interesting story. There are many wonderful stories, amazing stories about him, but there's not enough time to tell too many of them. In any case, he went forth as a monk at the age of 17. And when Tang Xuanzang was translating all of the treatises, he helped with this. In particular, it said that when they're translating the treatise on the proof of the mind only, it said that Kui Ji developed realization of the mind only at that point. So this is what is generally said. In addition to this, he's also studied the logics of validity, and because of the help and the kindness of Xuanzang, he wrote a commentary on the treatise on the proof of mind only, a commentary on differentiating the mind, middle from extremes, and many other commentaries. In particular, he held the mind-only view as taught by Xuanzang and Dharmapala as being like the basis, and he established like this an autonomous school teaching this, or an independent school teaching this, and that's because what we call the Dharma characteristic school. So he also wrote commentaries on many sutras and treatises, including the Praise of the White Lotus Sutra, the Teaching of Vimalakirti, and a short commentary on the Yogacaras. So he wrote so many commentaries that he was called the author of 100 commentaries. He also wrote a text called in Chinese the 法源一令章. So Kuiji was like the full founder of the Dharmakaya school. So he was the first holder of the lineage. And the second holder of the lineage was called Huizhao. Huizhao lived from 650 to 714. He wrote a text called The Definitive Meaning of the Proof of Mind Only. Now, his student was the third holder of the lineage at the Dharma Characteristic School, and his name was Zhizhuo. So Zhizhuo lived from 668 to 723. And so he was a great scholar as well. And he wrote a text called The Secret Teachings of the Proof of Mind Only. So that's a text. And so what that is primarily is, it took the thought and view of Dharmapala's mind only, and it re-systematized and propagated that. So the commentaries by Kui Ji on the treatise on the proof of mind only, and as well as the Huizhou's commentary, The Definitive Meaning of the Proof of Mind Only, and Zhizhuo's Secret Teachings on the Proof of Mind Only are called the three mind-only commentaries. And so these are considered the most authoritative, three most authoritative treatises on the mind only in China. And now the thought is called the analysis of the forefathers. So that's also considered the most authoritative analysis of the mind only. Now, the second holder of the lineage, Huizhao, his text, The Secret Teachings of the Mind Only, he also wrote other commentaries. He wrote a treatise called The Treatise on the Shining Sun of the Middle and Extremes, which is probably commentary on the differentiating the middle extremes, and also selected inspirations for bodhicitta. So some scholars these days, if we think about their opinion, yesterday I was speaking about the 10 levels school. That school takes as their foundational text the commentary of the 10 levels sutra, as I mentioned yesterday. And the compendium school takes the compendium Mahayana to be their own foundational text. However, these two texts only teach a partial mind-only view. the entire Indian mind-only philosophy is not presented in these texts. So for that reason, before the school of Dharmapala flourished, it's like you could say that all the branches were there, but the trunk was not there. It's like they didn't have the entire mind-only thought was not present, only like partially. And so it was only the Dharma characteristic school that had the entire mind-only view. And the reason for this is that Xuanzang went to unimaginable difficulty to go to India. And he actually studied the texts of the mind-only views that had been passed down in a pure lineage from Maitreya and Asanga and Vasubandhu down to Dharmapala. Oh, wait a minute, please. That's not it. And so his mind-only view, he studied the mind-only view. Not only did he study it, his greatest hope and his greatest resolve because of this, the Dharma character schools and their influence flourished widely during the Tang dynasty, both in religious and political terms. And it had exerted such great pressure, you could say, on the 10 levels in the compendium schools. So you get the great pressure or great influence. And so in the very end, those two schools then merged with the Dharma characteristic school. Similarly, as I will explain later, there were the three masters who came to study the Tang Dharma characteristic school, named Dosho, Chitatsu, and Gembo, and many other Japanese scholars who went to Tang. They went to China, and they went to study it, and they studied the mind-only philosophy, and then they brought it to Japan. And so for that reason, the Dharma characteristic school, it stayed there. Now, they didn't change it. They didn't change the name. And then that name was not translated. Still, that same school, the same name, flourishes to this day. And the reason why this happened is because of the Tang Xuanzang and Kui Ji founding this Dharma characteristic school and laying the foundations for it. And because it spread and flourished widely. Now, however, what happened at that time in China, the Dharma characteristic school spread very, very widely. However, and so even the earlier 10 levels in the compendium schools it sort of absorbed them. And it became like the Chinese mind-only school. So at that point, if you talked about mind-only in China, it was basically only the Dharma characteristic school. But there was a problem. There was a period of the Huichang persecution of Buddhism. There are several times where the persecutions of Buddhism. During the Huichang persecution of Buddhism, this is like the condition during the Qing dynasty. And because this is like the circumstances that after the Tang dynasty, the Dharma characteristic schools declined in China. And many of the texts related to it on the mind-only philosophy have been lost. So during the time of Zhizhou, he was the third holder of the lineage. He was the third holder of the Dharma characteristics lineage. Please wait a moment. So after the third holder, Zhizhou, was the transmission of the Dharma characteristics was lost primarily in China. Generally, usually there's an uninterrupted lineage, right? But after the third master, the lineage was not able to be propagated after that. It was broken at that point. So later what happened is that, as I said, in China there was people whose aim was to unite the old new translation. They created a new form, a new school, and this is what school was called, the Avatamsaka school. And so this is a view that like united the view of the Buddha nature school and the mind only school, and this flourished very widely. And so then here the Buddha nature school and the mind only school were kind of united in this. And then also the practice of the Dhyana or Chan school and the schools of the Pure Lands and the practices of Amitabha's practice of Amitabha reciting the names of these. And so the Pure Land school practices flourished very widely. And even within those, there is a little bit of philosophy related to the mind only. So the Dharma character, this is a pure mind-only Mahayana Indian tradition. So what is the reason why it declined in China? And for the reasons about this, there's a Japanese scholar whose name is Takemura Makio. So Takemura Makio says, there are three primary reasons. So he explained this in terms of three reasons. The first reason was that in the mind-only text, it's too much emphasis on the philosophy. And so other people who are extremely great scholars generally is above people's level. And so people weren't able to pay attention to it because only a few scholars could understand it. It was a very high level of philosophy. And so other people just couldn't get their minds around it. And so that was one reason why the mind-only lineage declined. Now, the second reason was in the mind-only text, it says that ultimately there are three vehicles. And there is also the five families. Now, assertion of the five families, there are the cut-off family and the uncertain families. And so the people in the cut-off family are people who will never awaken to Buddhahood. And so this is it. And so many people really didn't match people that fit with the hopes that many faithful Buddhists held in their hearts. Because everyone wants to have the hope of achieving liberation, achieving Buddhahood, but the mind only say that it's not certain. Some people will awaken to Buddhahood and some people won't. And the primary thing is that you have to look at what your own family is, what your own potential is. And so this didn't mesh with many faithful Buddhists with their hopes. Now, the third thing is that the mind-only texts say that in order to achieve the ultimate result, you have to go through the path gradually. And that takes a very long time. And so this is also didn't mesh with the inclinations of the Chinese people. If you're in the Chan school, you don't need to go down to a gradual path. You can do it immediately. If you realize the nature of your mind, then you immediately achieve liberation. And so the Chan teaches this, and many people are excited about this. Not only in Chinese, it's not just Chinese people, it also happens in Tibet. Everyone likes that, right? Now, the mind only didn't explain this way. They said that you have to go through the path gradually and only eventually, as you follow the training and follow the three trainings and go through the paths and levels, will you achieve the liberation. And so this was not satisfying for a lot of people. It didn't match their inclinations. So these are the main three reasons why the mind-only school declined. So if the mind-only school, did it disappear entirely from China? If it didn't no longer have any influence, it was not that. For example, when you're thinking about during the Yuan dynasty, excuse me, I have to look this up. Otherwise, sometimes I make mistakes. There was a practice during the Yuan dynasty that united the Chan or the Zen and the Pure Land practices. No, but initially there was a dispute between the Pure Land and the Zen schools, but eventually they united. But in any case, during the Yuan dynasty, there is a practice of uniting the Zen and the Pure Land, and within the Zen school, there is many teachings that also talked about them. There's a mind-only philosophy when teaching on the mind-only Pure Land. And in particular, during the Ming Dynasty, there was a teacher named Hanshang Deqing, and he was a great scholar and a great practitioner. And he had the great wish to revive the Dharma Characteristic School. So he wrote a text called the Xing Xiandan Shou. There's a text called the words about the union of appearance and nature, or the harmony of appearance, and words about the harmony of appearance and nature. And he's spent a lot of mind-only thought. But at that time, the texts on the mind-only philosophy were very rare. And so at that time, he was not able to continue improving the mind-only school. Then at the end of the Qing dynasty, there was a lay practitioner named Yang Renshan. And he went to Japan. And when he went to Japan, he saw all the texts of the Dharma Characteristic schools from China. Then he saw all of these, and he brought many of these texts back to China. And when he reintroduced them to China, and so that people among there was like the big earthquake among all the scholars at that time, because there's such a great din about it. And the reason for this is in so many centuries that the mind-only school had disappeared, or that it declined, and people, if they wanted to study, would not find it. And so now they had the text, and they had been able to do this. For example, it's like similar to like with our Karmakaji, like from the seventh Karmapa, they began having shudras and monastic colleges during the time, and until the 10th Karmapa, the shudras were very strong. There were many scholars, but then later, after the 10th, the teachings declined greatly, and the tradition of teaching, or the transmission of the teachings, was interrupted. And so later, the Kagyu became people who really were always given as examples of people who didn't really know anything about philosophical texts. Now, after the 16th Karmapa returned or went to India, and he established a Shedra in Rumtek, and he also reprinted or published the works of the 8th Karmapa Mikyo Dorje. And so this is when he first came from Tibet, and at that time, most of the Kagyu Khenpos in Tibet really hadn't seen any Tibetan texts. So they had primarily studied from the